we have Grace Jolicoeur, and she is a teacher. She teaches a variety of things, but we'll talk today about yoga. So, Grace, and welcome.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having
Absolutely.
me.
I think one of the first kind of questions, since we see you in the lotus position, is how long did it take you to get that lotus position?
I started doing yoga postures when I was about 12 years old.
Mhm.
So there's actually never really been a point in my life so far where I couldn't do the lotus position or Padmasana.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's definitely been times where I've been a little bit tighter, but kind of always had it.
I see. And that's actually a
Mhm.
perfect segue, which is you started when you were 12. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So yoga has always really felt like my thing. I remember, when other people were really like they're super into soccer or they're really into basketball or something. Um, nothing really like landed with me. I did do gymnastics actually when I was really younger, so that probably had an impact. Um, but I just remember like the first time I was in a yoga class, I remember just like standing in tree pose and just feeling like, yeah, this is my thing. And I'm so glad I started like pre-Instagram and everything. I feel like I got a really like rich and like slow learning process that I really kind of come into like a new appreciation for in the last like 8 years.
I see. I see. So tell me about what you got started with in yoga. Was it a specific style or was it just a specific teacher that taught a bunch of styles?
I kind of feel like my intuition was my first teacher. I remember being in first grade and we had to do that like stretching test. I was so rubbish at it. Like when you're sitting at that box and you have to go forward. And I remember that day, I was like, if I'm going to be alive, I want to touch my toes. And every day after that, I woke up and I would just hang forward, which is Persistanasana, um, which I didn't realize at the time. But I feel like that moment when you really like um, consciously make a choice to create a change and then you take the steps forward with it, that's, I feel like, when anyone is like really stepping into their own practice and understanding. It was my grandma who took me to my first actual yoga class, and it was like old folks in the park, which is like the sweetest thing. After that, in middle school, I would like bike to. There was this one yoga studio in my town. I would bike over there after church and do their classes. They had Hatha and Ashtanga Yoga. So for people who know about posture, Hatha yoga, it really is a large umbrella term, and I have so much to say about that. But in general, you could say that you're really practicing more stagnant postures versus vinyasa, where you're like kind of constantly switching between things. And Ashtanga yoga, for people who really like to get physical, which is very true for me, and having gymnastics background as well. Ashtanga yoga is basically at one point they took hatha postures, made them into a very intense sequence, almost very gymnastics like. And it was designed for young boys to perform to royalty as to be like interesting and exciting. So in the yoga world, some people really like Ashtanga yoga, but as far as like a daily practice is concerned, it's not considered to be the most sustainable or even reasonable, because as our bodies evolve, we can't always do an inverted jump through the hands onto your, it's a lot going on. But I really enjoyed parts of that because it is really active and engaging.
Wow.
um yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It kind of goes into a very quick question and slash kind of maybe this is more an opinion, but I've heard people tell me that whatever styles of yoga that people used to do in like the ancient days, it was more
Hmm.
to almost put you in an uncomfortable position just so you could kind of like learn more about the world, whether spiritually or whatever. So it wasn't supposed to be like, oh yeah, get comfortable, right? It's supposed to be like, oh, wow, I'm hurting. Okay, let's like that way it gets thoughts out of my mind. I can think about other things, right? Is that like a right interpretation? Because I've heard a few people tell me that.
So it is so fascinating, all of the different ways people choose to kind of look at a yoga practice. That is absolutely one way to look at it. And I really connect to that. I connect to it less so than about putting myself in an uncomfortable position, but just seeing almost like a body puzzle or a breath puzzle. How can I be in more unique positions comfortably? So just like in life, there are all kinds of different situations come up. Is it an uncomfortable position? Well, it is if it's uncomfortable for you. It's a unique position, that's for sure. And it really depends on all the things going on for you, if it's going to be uncomfortable or not. So yeah, I definitely feel like it's being able to be in, having full access to yourself. So to me, I do happen to have a lot of flexibility, but for me, yoga is absolutely not about my flexibility. Or if it is, it's because I have access to full range of motion. It's because I have access to all these different, angles of my own body, which means I can just discover different things. This automatically affects your mind. If you can only move in a certain range of motion, it kind of affects the way that you move into different circumstances. But when you feel physically capable, if you're someone who already has a yoga practice and you go walk into jiu-jitsu school, some of those positions aren't going to look as scary because you already know, well, my leg can bend that way. But if you don't have access to that and you see someone get thrown and inverted, you're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. So it definitely is that mind body component to give yourself more access.
And I love what you said, because at the end of the day, right, every new position you learn with your body, you're building new neurons and building new pathways too. So I never even thought about it that way, but yeah, taking away all the woo woo and stuff, or all the attempts at interpreting history, you're growing your neurons when you learn new positions safely in yoga. So yeah, that's a really cool way. Yeah, it's really cool. And then, like you said, you put yourself in a new position. It just gives you more kind of ways to think. I really like what you said there.
What's interesting with that, I've found as well, as a teacher now, I do teach in a variety of ways. There are some times I'm teaching that are more restorative style. In general, if you look at the videos I post on Instagram or the classes that I teach, I tend to show what I would call more like functional mobility versus what we'd kind of call like unsustainable stretching. And the thing with that is, a lot of times, even if you look at, because yoga has a history of people doing things that basically undo their own body. And in a way, you can kind of undo your own mind. And that's great if you want to undo your mind and if you want to undo your body. But not all of us are trying to do that. Some of us want to actually have our body, still somewhat together so we can do our sports, hang out with our friends, be with our family. So it's not actually taking everything to the extreme, but how to give yourself a wide range of capability within your physical reality. So there is something that we see, which is what I would say, not to be a positive side to Instagram or the internet, is while it does give a lot of exposure, we also see people who get more attention because they're doing a more extreme position. But the thing is, in some of that stretching, people will find later in life, their hips will slip, their joints will slip, their tendons, won't like kind of re-solidify. And so parts of their body are slipping out of place. I don't want that. I don't need that. So it's kind of finding that sweet spot of giving yourself access to many different angles within a sustainable range of motion.
I love what you said about sustainable because I even remember the way I always interpreted yoga. I think I first discovered yoga in college, right? But I didn't start doing yoga until after college. But I remember when I discovered yoga in college, there was this one girl who would always do yoga poses in the gym, and she would get into these crazily awesome, like contorted positions, but she'd like almost like muscle her way to it. Like you could tell it's like, ugh, I'm worried about your body in 20 years. And like you said, I think there's some of that going on, whether on Instagram or whatever. It's like they're getting into that position too quickly because you only have a minute, right? Unless you want to create like an IGTV post, so maybe they're like trying to speed it up just for the camera. So it's like, ugh, people who don't know that, you don't want them to think that's what yoga is, and you don't want them to just start trying that. I've heard many stories of people trying things like headstands and stuff like that, not understanding it takes months to build up to it, and it's like, oh, I'm doing something.
You make such a good point. I completely agree with you. This is something I've been currently working on as I make video classes for people, is that people are really ready for everything to start right away. People want to get to the results. They want to get to what they find interesting and fun. But the amount of times I see people like, oh, I can do a headstand, and they jump up and their alignment is not happening. And the compression I can see happen in the neck. And to me, it's so much more cool to actually be able to really enter in and enter out gracefully than to just jump into position and jump out. I was literally just talking to someone about this today. That would be like me being in jiu-jitsu and just always trying to do a flying armbar when I don't really know how to do it. And it's like, hold on, slow down, let's do jiu-jitsu. Like, learn that and do that at the appropriate time. But if you can't really, find the right movement and land there, it's not really happening. And when we get to the truth of what yoga is, yoga can be applied in so many different ways. I mean, you can apply aspects of yoga to almost any activity that a person does, and still at the heart of a practice is really being present. And unlike in so many other activities where you can get you rise in rank or you get an award, we don't get anything. In fact, kind of the mark of a good practice is that you don't get anything, because what is there to really want? When we're not striving just to be at a certain position, we're more willing to be present along the route. And then you get everything. You get to feel the process. You get to feel your breath while you're doing it. You can notice exactly which muscles are engaging. You get to enjoy the sensation of it. And you're more likely to be able to do that practice for longer in your life. So in that way, you get so much more by really fully doing it versus jumping up and jumping down.
And I can add extra kind of support to what Grace is saying, because like most people who've done active stuff, I've gone to physical therapy for different, tensions, different imbalances and stuff. And one of the things that I learned in physical therapy is just pay attention to your body to see what muscles are activating, right? What parts of your body are activating, because a lot of times that's part of this awareness that a lot of even athletes don't have. From a young age, they just do it, they get better at it, but they don't really think about it. Okay, what part of my arm, what part of my shoulder, what part of my back's engaging? And so what the physical therapist had to teach me is, okay, do it very slowly, then, break it up and really feel like, okay, what part of your body should be activating, what part of your body maybe is overactivating, etc. And I think what I'm learning from you, Grace, is that yoga should be taken that same way. Really, ultimately, mindfulness, right? And part of mindfulness is really understanding what's activating, what's being felt in the body, all this stuff. And a lot of that gets skipped over to almost the consequences, right? The consequence, whether I'm relaxed, I want to feel relaxed, or I want to look good on Instagram, or I want to get good at a position. Those are all consequentialist thoughts. But the journey, the mindfulness is something we always have to emphasize for people who do yoga, like pay attention to that more. Consequences come later. You know, that's the whole point of meditation in general. It's not about the consequences, it's about the here.
You make such a good point. I really appreciate you saying that. And I think, again, that's why I'm so grateful to be someone who came into a practice pre, the internet being so popularized, because I didn't even know that was an option. All of my first yoga teachers were like 55, 6-year-old ladies who were, always just giving like such insightful cues. And I really draw on that all the time. And now that I've worked with some incredibly masterful teachers who, when you get to a certain level, it's not really even about yoga postures anymore. When I work with, my teachers who have been, who grew up in the Himalayas or have been doing yoga their entire life, all of that practice is really creating the foundation within the body so that you can be a sustainable vessel for the more interesting, not more interesting, but additionally interesting work with your breath, with your mind, with really delving into meditation. Because when you can actually meditate, when you can actually focus, there's a whole other world of practice that's just so enriching. And, one of the keys for that is that if you can't sit, if you can't focus, we simply are not able to even, perceive that the rest of that practice even exists.
So, Grace, tell me about when you started teaching yoga.
I waited a relatively long time, I guess I would say, from when I started to when I started teaching. I started teaching like full time about 5 or 6 years ago. I didn't even properly know that's what I was going to do. It was just such a huge part of my world. And when I moved back from California to Chicago, I landed and it just opened up. Like within a couple months, I was teaching at 4 or 5 different places. My schedule was completely full. And I was like, whoa, okay, I'm doing this now. And since then, that's what I've been doing. I started casually teaching when I was much younger. I was a part of a youth group when I was in high school, and when we would go on these work retreats, I would always teach a morning yoga class just because it was fun and it was because it was something I could share. Or I remember when I was in university, I helped out sometimes with this student political group, and when we would go on conventions to Washington DC to lobby for certain student bills or whatever, I felt like one of the more valuable things I could do would be to offer a yoga practice or a breath practice. Because if you've ever been in one of those high energy environments, people are just drinking coffee, just going and going and going. And so I would offer that. Yeah, exactly. I would offer that as a way I felt like I could be helpful and I could kind of support the people around me. And I studied fine arts and environmental studies in school, and my art practice has been majorly affected by yoga. So I've really worked with it amid all of the other things that I was doing. But yeah, it was about 5 or 6 years ago that I really just stepped up and started really actually teaching.
And it was especially awesome you said Chicago, because you could say I'm a quarter Chicago boy too, because I spent 3.5 formidable years of my young life in Chicago. So whenever I hear Chicago, I'm like, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so you're in Chicago now.
Yes, I'm in Chicago right now.
Oh my goodness, I miss Chicago so much. I haven't been in Chicago since 2014. So when everything ends, man, maybe you and I will do a video together for the dojo.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
And actually, this is a perfect time since I mentioned the dojo. So for those of you watching, the dojo is a place for content creators and instructors of the various martial arts to just go and have a more specialized place for instruction, for videos, for whatever. So if any of you want to find me or find Grace, we are on the dojo along with other very talented martial artists of various sorts. So yeah, that was a little plug for the dojo, and we'll do more on the dojo. In fact, this is probably going on the dojo first. I think that was a pretty smooth little plug.
100%.
Yeah.
And the course that I've made on the dojo, so I've been doing jiu-jitsu about 5 years now, and that's how I met Jason at Cho's Academy. A lot of the videos that I've been making, I've been specifically working on them kind of being a pace to be helpful for people with a martial arts, with an active martial arts training. So I'm kind of, catering very much what I'm sharing. It's a very like kind of classical yoga practice, but with the intention to serve people who are being kind of aggressive with their bodies.
I love it. I love it. And I've seen some schools kind of try to incorporate yoga into whether before you do the jiu-jitsu or the Muay Thai, you do the yoga, or after you do jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai, you do the yoga. So that's pretty cool. I'm glad that's happening more.
Yeah, it's I think one thing that I've been intentional about is I still really teach it as like a complete practice. So if someone is just wanting to get the benefits for their martial arts training, that's totally fine. But the way my classes are set up, you're also really becoming a part of the yoga world, and that I open the classes and close the classes in the same way. I give you the terms, I give you the information, so that if it does speak to you, everything that I've shared with you can lead you to something more. So rather than like changing the names and just extracting things for a simple stretch, I'm really giving as much information as I can, so that the new practitioner really gets what's going on in like an actual yoga practice.
And I love that what you're doing, because one of the problems with people who start out in martial arts that spar is they don't focus on technique, right? Because they don't have the proprioception yet. I don't even know if I'm using that word correctly, but I'm just going to run with it. They don't even have the proprioception yet to know what muscle groups, what joints are really required to get this move right. So often they default to muscling. And, it's hard to just be like, hey, stop muscling, or hey, go gentle. They don't understand what that means. So it's almost like by incorporating yoga into jiu-jitsu or yoga into Muay Thai, it'll help them better understand, oh yeah, pay attention to what's activating. Pay attention to how your body moves, instead of just, oh, I'm going to get this by, which is a big problem. That's how people get hurt in jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai or whatever.
Totally. You make a really good point. And I'm very much a technique girl. I really, really appreciate technique because within the technique, you can really become artful when you actually can feel and, have the intelligence of where things are supposed to be. You can make intelligent choices from there. One main thing that I've noticed is, for example, in yoga, all of my teachers used to really emphasize like the awareness in my hands and feet. And I cue for this all the time because people forget and they put their hands on the yoga mat in all of these weird ways. And so it's like very damaging, but it can become such a cue for like mindfulness, as you said, if we're constantly grounding through the hands. When I get thrown on the jiu-jitsu mats, I'm like always so aware of how I'm landing with my hands. And I feel like it saves me so often from like landing unconsciously to like hurt fingers and whatnot. So there's all kinds of different, like that's one major one that I think is really interesting, is like just the awareness in the hands and feet, as well as, the rest of the body. But yeah, gaining that awareness can change everything.
And it's funny to talk about hands and wrists, because I did about a month of vinyasa yoga. So my first full-time job out of college, I was working at the Philadelphia Fox station, Fox 29, and it was the most stressful environment ever. So when I was thinking about quitting, I did a month of yoga right before I quit, right? So that month of yoga helped ground me a little. But see, I honestly wasn't ready to do yoga because I still wasn't really mindful. I was thinking consequentially. I'm like, after every day of practice, I get very relaxed. But I wasn't mindful of my hands. So like, kind of like the same thing. I must have been holding my hands in a weird position, especially when you're in vinyasa yoga. You like go up to that position. I don't know. I forgot. It's too many years. But my wrist started hurting. Yeah, exactly. And I think I still have some, whether it's damage or sensitivity from those days of not doing that correctly. So yeah, that's a
Yeah.
perfect example.
Yeah. It's the process will always be, where all the gold is at. The process is everything. And in the process of yoga, we really, when you're touching on, accessing the body, whether that's gaining flexibility or even just like muscular awareness, when we're connecting to the breath, focusing the mind, even connecting to like the experience of like resonance within your throat, if we were to use like a mantra, um, all of those things at once, the more they're practiced, you start to see them within everything that you do. And yeah, I mean, I know it's completely, invaluable to me, in my experience of stepping into jujitsu. Um, so many benefits, and obviously in my, work and personal life.
And one last connection with like combat sports and yoga is that a lot of times you see people don't breathe, right? In whatever combat sports they're doing. And that's another great thing that yoga, meditation, I think Aikido has helped me too. It's just like I breathe so hard. I just breathe more naturally when I'm doing. Of course, my technique still needs a lot of work, but at least when I'm doing whatever jujitsu, Muay Thai, I'm the one that you hear me breathing. So I've already
Mm-hmm.
like conquered half the battle. The other half is to get good at that art, but at least I breathe, which is already half the battle.
Yeah. So a lot of one of my favorite sutras of Patanjali is Sthira Sukhamasana, which means posture comes from the balance of effort and ease. And I feel like this is true in all things. Just like you're saying in martial arts, it's not even about muscling your way through. There has to be a flow and a presence to even have that muscle land where it needs to. Even within breathing practice, you're just talking about breathing hard, and this isn't to get at what you just said, but sometimes when I have people who are really wanting to get better at their breathing, that's just it. They're wanting to get better at their breathing. So they're feeling like they need to breathe hard. But it's not about breathing hard. It's about breathing fully, deeply, and completely to get the most pranic intake. And so sometimes I'll see people really almost like, like they're really creating like agitation in their body versus just being very consolidated and relaxed. How to be soft and strong at the same time. And that's something I really try to like kind of get people to like slow down with me, because once we slow down, then we can focus and from there amp up the power, but without agitation.
Yeah, this opens up so many great topics, and potentially this can be we can do a whole conversation maybe for your stuff on the dojo on breathing, because I could go on and on. Like I used to not breathe even through my nose because I sang in
Mm.
choir in middle school, and in like in choir you're always taught to like so it's like a
Mm-hmm.
bad habit. So it's like not until 2019 when I was exploring tongue posture and stuff like that. I was like, oh, if you put your tongue in the right posture, you're naturally gonna breathe through your nose. You don't have to like remind yourself or forcefully breathe through the nose. You just breathe through the nose like a natural human being. It's like these are such
Yeah.
interesting things to talk about. But yeah, if you want to go into it, let's go into it.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's so much that we could talk about. Here's my dog.
Oh, you're doggy.
Um,
He's like, I don't want to be on camera.
um, with breathing, like just like you were saying, there's a technique to it. I find this with both women who have felt like they need to be thin or like contained, and also with men who've experienced the same thing. There's this. It's very common that people do reverse breathing, where they inhale and exhale, and it's like that doesn't make any sense. If you're filling a water balloon, it's going to expand out. When you release it, it's going to go back in. So a lot of times, it becomes something that has to have, like any technique in any martial art, repetition. We have to have repetition of it so we can develop a new muscle memory. And with that, we're releasing any thought patterns that came with it. So if someone thought, oh, I'm being small, I'm being cute, I'm being contained because my belly's not big, releasing that because, oh, look, my belly's big and I'm still those things, whatever, you know? So it's really, really important. And to kind of make that martial art connection that you made, I've found as I've been, learning, I tap right away when I need to, but I found because I feel very comfortable with my breathing, when I get in an uncomfortable situation, my go-to is to I don't know, I would call it check my stats. I'm where is there pain? And I can just breathe while I check on what's happening. So if you're able to connect automatically to your breath, you're basically buying yourself more time to figure out, am I actually in a bad position? Or do I just think I'm in a bad position because I'm experiencing some pressure? And the more that you can really be there and feel it, you can tell the difference between it just being uncomfortable and it being a true, tap or whatever.
Yeah, that's such a great point you make, and just from my kind of interpretation of that, by breathing more naturally, so to speak, it also just slows your mind down just to process more, right? So instead of in fight or flight mode, you actually give your mind the natural brain processing power to be like, oh, let's check, oh, let's check, just check on everything, and instead of
Exactly.
you know.
And these are things that, I found for anyone who's dedicated to a practice, often people are slowly teaching themselves aspects of this. It's just that in yoga, we're conscious of it. So this is one thing, I feel like that's why I get along with a lot of, martial artists or really anyone who's very dedicated to something. A lot of times these folks will have already accidentally learned some of that. But then there's that cue of, but are you aware that you notice it and can you use it to your advantage? And that's the interesting thing with yoga, is that the whole point is to be conscious of it and then expand on that. Yeah.
Wow. I think the last topic to cover is, so you teach what's called Hatha Yoga. So let's talk a little bit about that. How did you discover that? And why did you decide, okay, that's going to be one of my focuses?
Sure. So, we talked briefly. So I would say that I started in Hatha Yoga. Hatha in general, Ha means sun and Tha means moon. Hatha is the balance of the solar and lunar internal energies. And we're constantly doing that with the breathing techniques with physical postures. We're balancing that very active and that very receptive quality within us, just like that sutra I told you about, the effort and the ease, the solar and the lunar, right? So in that way, Hatha is actually a very broad term. In a way, you could say Hatha kind of births all of these other practices. But in general, it's going to be a class where you have your breathing technique. You go through posture to posture before you access your meditation. After doing Hatha Yoga for about 8 years or so, it really led me to having some very profound internal and energetic experiences that led me to Kundalini Yoga. And Kundalini Yoga referring to specifically energetic practices that have to do with the natural energy that flows through your body. So you're, rather than slowly cultivating it, you're just kind of tapping directly into it and giving yourself pretty heightened experiences. So I was practicing specifically Aquarian Kundalini Yoga for about 7 years, which is a very intense and a very dedicated type of practice. With doing that, I just learned a lot about the background history of that specific lineage, and also how in teaching it, doing Aquarian Kundalini basically presupposes that you know how to do Hatha. And that got me really curious. And so that's why I went back to India in 2020, was to study the Vedic origins of Kundalini Yoga. So I was there when the pandemic hit. So I had my first 9 months of the pandemic at my yoga ashram in Rishikesh. And what I have really kind of grounded back into is that all Kundalini Yoga is Hatha Yoga. What we refer to as Hatha Yoga are all of the foundational techniques that are really cultivating your system to be a sustainable vessel for channeling those higher energies. All Kundalini Yoga is actually, like in the old Hatha texts, it's all included in there. So after all of that, I am very much kind of consider myself a Hatha Yoga teacher, because that means that I can basically share anything that is appropriate to the students at hand. All Hatha has the ability to give you powerful energetic experiences, as well as just, create important openings within the body, within the mind, within your pranic capabilities. But I found it seems to not always be helpful to go straight into the energetic work if people can't do the foundations. And so, yeah, that's a lot of what I teach. And it seems to be really, really helpful for people. And it feels very grounded to me.
And I think this is a great setup for future talks. So people who, whether you find this on the dojo or you find this on Fight Commentary Chats or maybe on one of Grace's channels, will definitely explore a lot of these in depth. So I think I actually had one final question that prompted from you describing your practice, which is, let's say a student comes to you their first day of yoga class. What do you usually do with them? I think that's a common question that a lot of people who might not be sure about trying yoga, they would ask. So tell me more about that.
So like what would their first class look like?
Exactly. What would their first class be like?
So I'm a fairly traditional teacher, as I told you before. In every class that I teach, we always, tune in the same way using Om. Then I always have one mantra that we're working with in the day. And it's very simple. It's a repetitive sound, and it tends to just help to open the throat, help the person become receptive, and also just seed a concept that can be a theme for the rest of the practice. Then we drop in with a breathing technique. If it's their first day, I'll usually keep it really simple. I probably would introduce something like Kapalabhati, which is our breath of fire. It's not always the most simple, but it's something people can fairly step into, and I know that they're going to see it repeatedly in my class, so it's a good go-to. After that, we get into all of our movements. In every class I teach, and I teach how my teacher, Yogi Shivashiketu, how he teaches. And that is, we always do folding, twisting, bending, standing, back bending. We kind of hit every angle within one class. If it's their first day, we'll definitely take our time warming up on the floor. We'll, do our twists, our side bends, just kind of opening up the spine, opening up the mid body. We might do some floor leg stretches to get those warmed up. We'll make our way to the hands and knees. We'll progress up into Parvatasana or mountain pose, sometimes called triangle pose. And if it's the first, depending on, if someone's, if it's their first day, but they're physically, very capable, we'll absolutely get into our classical Surya Namaskar Asana, which is the classical sun salutation. If, they've got a lot of injuries or something, we'll just do the half sun salutation just to get the sciatic nerve warmed up and kind of get used to what that sequence would look like, but keep it pretty simple. We always do a balancing pose, and then we make our way back down to the ground, do a couple closing positions on the floor to really soften the spine, make us feel relaxed, and then Shavasana. I always leave a couple moments for when people do sit up, to at least have a couple moments where they are just sitting with their breath. It's tempting as a teacher to always kind of give practices to do. But kind of one of the arts of my job is also to pull back and give that person a moment to just be with their essential self, just to be with the breath. So we always have a few moments to do that before we close.
And that sounds great. Sounds like I think anyone watching this definitely go check out Grace on the dojo, but it definitely sounds like we're gonna do a lot of follow-ups because I'm super interested in anyone watching. Hopefully they're super interested in this too. So Grace, besides, we're gonna make more videos together. What is your plan for the end of 2021 and 2022? Like, what are some big potential plans for you?
Big potential plans. Wow. This has been such an amazing year. This year, I had no idea what was going to happen when I did finally come back from India. I feel like this year has been so much fun, stepping back into Chicago and being accessible and helpful for people with sharing my practice. I've been really spending more time working directly with people who are like jiu-jitsu practitioners, so that I can, make my videos on the dojo even more relatable to people doing martial arts. Another thing that I do is I teach Reiki, and I do Reiki sessions. So it seems like right now it's kind of just building on everything that I've already got going on. I'm really excited to have live classes on the dojo so that people who've met me in different areas of the US or different areas of the world can potentially drop in, because it's been not easy to know how to direct everyone to actually how to get to what it is that we're offering.
Cool. I think this is a perfect first talk. And for those of you who see this on the dojo, thank you. And when this goes on YouTube, you could have saw it on the dojo before. So you guys should go on the dojo and, check it out more. So, yeah, this was great. So, Grace, thank you so much. Grace Jolicoeur. I will link her stuff and you guys can go check her out.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jerry. This was great.